we're going to talk about some key comic books that are hard to find, that aren't Marvel, aren't DC, and many of them aren't even superheroes. They're genres that you might not really be thinking about. Up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hey there, comic book community. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. Before we get started, like, comment, subscribe. You know what to do there. Follow us on the other socials, Instagram, Bronzeville_comics. You can reach out to me there with questions. There's a link in the description for my email. If you have anything you want to ask me, reach out there. Also, in the description is a link to Whatnot. I do Whatnot shows, Bronzeville_comics, every Monday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. And if you're not yet signed up with Whatnot, you can use the link in the description. You'll get $10 off your first purchase, regardless of who you buy an item from. And also, there is a link to my eBay store and a link to the King Con 4 show coming up in just about a month, March 25th and 26th in Island, New Jersey. So many content creators on the YouTube and Instagram side will be there selling. There'll be Very Gary, there'll be Erod212, 360 Comics, Streetside Anthony. There'll be the Pressable Defects will be there. The 3 Men in a Basement will be there. There'll be a lot of great vendors there too, like Goodbye Comics, Panther Comics, NRG, Bad Fish, Fury Comics will be there. So just come by, check it out. There'll be plenty of great comics to find. Spend your tax returns and get some great comic books. So the plan was for this video to start with an unboxing, but I didn't hit the record button, and I already unboxed everything. So I'm going to go through what I got again real quick, because I know that a lot of us like to see that sort of thing, and I've got to figure out where it is. So the first thing I unboxed was my monthly Comic Tom mystery mail call. And they usually comes with an art print. This is, I'm never quite sure. I think that's Mandalorian. Boba Fett would have a dent in his helmet. Or maybe there is a dent. I think that might be Boba Fett. I'm not sure. I really should be better at picking that out. And on the back of the art print is a QR code which shows the exclusives that are in here. And there's a great deal of variability in terms of the print counts for some of the covers. Is it a virgin? Is it a foil? So some of those can be desired by collectors, so they're worth a lot. There's also, they've been including these digital comics. It's a digital graphic novel, a comic tag they call it. This is for the recount. I read the first issue of this. I got in a previous mystery mail call, and it was a very intriguing story. A corrupt U.S. president is assassinated by an agent in his Secret Service detail, and the vice president, Meredith McDearman, apprehensively assumes her new role. Her first task, she must deal with ruthless conspirators known as the Masses, who announce their vow to take out anyone who sided with the murdered president. Special Agent Bardo must get the new president to the safety of the White House before the nation collapses. I think that's a property that's been optioned, but of course being optioned doesn't necessarily mean that anything's coming of it. There's also, it also includes some art prints. This Spider-Punk art print. There's always a kids book, and this I found kind of interesting. Patrick Wolfboy by Night, a collaboration with Comic Tom and Aw Yeah Comics. Aw Yeah is a comic shop that's local here to me in Westchester County, New York. I've been there several times, seen them set up at different events. Really cool dude there, and they do have constantly overturning their back stock. They usually have a pretty good selection of back issues. Follow them on Instagram. They have some good stuff. Comic Tom always includes an older issue, but for me, an older issue isn't really all that old. This is Detective Comics 663 from 1993. It's 30 years old. That's not that old to me. Part of the Nightfall run. I have it. And then I got this is, I guess the cover A. Well, I guess it's not the cover A, but whoever, who did this one? Is this, Desjardins? Yeah. This cover of Gargoyles, a new title that's been rebooted by Dynamite. That's pretty cool. This is, and I have to check my phone because I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what the significance of this was. And this is Ninja Funk number 2, a Natalie Sanders cover. I read Ninja Funk number 1. Meh. I'll probably read this one as well just to kind of see what it's all about, see if it improved. And this is an In-Hyuk Lee cover for Grimm number 6. That was in the mystery mail call. I opened another eBay order that I had recently grabbed. And it is a copy of Superboy number 94. This is the first appearance of Ultra Boy, one of the members of the Legion of Superheroes. I've been speculating on Legion first appearances. I got multiple copies of some of them. Most of those are early Silver Age books. Remember, the Legion of Superheroes is the first superhero team in the Silver Age. Predates even the Justice League of America. I think it's too good a property to go untapped in the DCU. So I got a lot. I spent, I think, $70 on this lot. All Action Comics. None of these are keys, but this 80-page Giant, 360, some Bronze Age 431, 2 copies of that. This is a lower grade copy. These are all just kind of PC books. I'm trying to work on an Action Comics run. 430, 400. That's in lower grade. The grade, the condition on these is very variable. 397, mostly mid-graders. Although, 395. This is 366 Neil Adams cover. Did a lot of covers for DC at that period of time. 365, Superman's dying, his funeral. 364, he gets this kryptonite virus, Kryptonian leprosy. That sounds painful. There's 362. 353. Not bad. We're working our way down. We're down to 12 centers. 332. 330. 326. What's this? 322. I just want to make sure I'm recording because I'm now paranoid about that. 320. It's a little bit rougher. But then we got 10 centers. And a little bit of a water stain on this. 281. And finally, this is the last one, 268. So some 10-cent Action Comics. I'll just kind of throw those into the PC. You know, the 10 centers are worth probably about $20 to $30. So I figure $70 for the pile. I probably just got a little over anxious to buy that. The last book that I picked up, I have to put this in a bag and board. This is actually, I picked this up. I'm going to give it to a friend of mine. This is from 1973, and this is from Charlton Comics. It is 1776. Number one, it's only one issue. This is based on a musical. It was a Broadway musical that was a feature film in 1972 about the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It starred William Daniels, who, for you nerds, you may know better as the voice of Kit from Knight Rider. Also starred Ken Howard and Howard Da Silva, who was a veteran actor by that time. And I'm going to kind of... in Blythe Danner, Gwyneth Paltrow's mom, was... the mom in Meet the Fockers, was played Martha Jefferson. So, yeah. it's kind of a little cool niche piece of history. So I do have a friend of mine. He's a history buff. He's a big fan of that movie. His birthday's coming up, so I'm going to give that to him. And it kind of goes along with this line that we use: collect what you love. Right? If you like something, collect that. Don't collect stuff because everybody else is. And I'm going to talk about an opportunity to find some harder to find comic books that are not Marvel or DC superheroes. These really aren't even like horror or anything like that, but these are, for the most part, properties that lots of people are familiar with. And we're going to talk about their low print count and how hard these books are to find. So most of these books, the early books, are from Dell Publishing. Dell did a lot of the humor titles, the Looney Tunes, the Disney characters, a lot of movie and TV adaptations in the 40s into the 50s, the 60s. And they had an agreement with Western Publishing. Dell started publishing comics in 1929. A lot of their early books were compilations of newspaper strips. And then in 1962, they severed their relationship. Western kind of broke away from Dell and started their own imprint, Gold Key. Sometimes you'll see the publisher referred to as Gold Key. Sometimes it's Western. So Western took all of these licensed properties with them and started to make these comic books. And so a lot. And I just grabbed a stack I had from a box of random books. Movies, TV shows, cartoons. This is a Dell book, Spartacus, with Kirk Douglas. A lot of these movie adaptations had color cover photos that are pretty cool. If you like the movie Spartacus, I mean, these are in lower grade. I got these as part of a collection. Tom and Jerry cartoons were huge, winning Academy Awards for Best Animated Shorts in the 40s and 50s. So Dell did a run of those. The Parent Trap. I think this movie's been remade twice. This is the original. See, Walt Disney's The Parent Trap. It was a Haley Mills was originally, and I think, was it Maureen O'Hara? And I forget who played the dad. I Love Lucy was a series, right? A TV adaptation, early TV adaptation. Mutiny on the Bounty photo cover with Marlon Brando. This is a Gold Key book. I'm not exactly sure. This is a 12 center. So this is probably like 62, 63. I'm not exactly sure when that movie came out. So let's take a look. The first one we're going to look at is from 1961. It's a Dell book, Dell Giant number 48, which is important because it's the first appearance of the Flintstones in comic books. There are only 79 copies on the census, universal blue label copies. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about, how many copies are in the census and what the grades are. The median grade of those 79 copies is a 6.0. However, there are 398s and 696s. I do believe that Dell kept file copies of a lot of these books, and that, when they came to circulation, are these high-grade books. I don't think a lot of collectors in 1961 were picking up the first appearance of the Flintstones and, preserving it pristinely. Just to compare to a very popular superhero key, also from 1961, Flash 123. The first appearance of Jay Garrick in the Silver Age, the introduction of the multiverse, the introduction of Earth 2. There are 79 copies of the Flintstones. There are 1,187 Universal Blue Label copies of Flash 123. Only 196. The Flintstones has 696s and 398s. So more high-grade copies of the Flintstones. Those are 9 out of just 79 copies. Whereas there's 196 out of 1,187 copies for Flash. The median grade for the Flash is a 4.5. The last sale of the Flintstones book was in a 6.0 in February of 2021 for $600. Now, the Flintstones is a property that, if you grew up in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, you know the Flintstones. The animated series, there were, other incarnations of the characters in other animated series. There was the live-action movie with John Goodman and Rick Moranis in the 90s. So it is a property, and even my kids still chew they got the Flintstones vitamins, right? So the Flintstones is an ever-present intellectual property. And again, something, we see this, and we'll see this in terms of some of the books on this list, that comes back. You know, a lot of these popular IPs come back as TV shows, as movies. Speaking of which, let's move on to a book from 1962. Barbie and Ken, #1. The first appearance of Barbie and the first appearance of Ken. This is also Dell. There is a Barbie movie with Margot Robbie coming out later this year. 28 Universal Blue labels on the CGC census of Barbie and Ken #1. 28. The median grade is 4.75. There is a 9.8 and 2 9.6s. Again, 3 high-grade copies. Let's compare that to just a random Silver Age non-key book from the same year, 1962, Fantastic Four #9. 1,003 copies on the census, more than 30 times as many copies of FF9. The FF9 has a higher median of 5.0, slightly higher. Has also 198 and 696s. So actually the Barbie has a higher percentage of high grade 9698s than the Fantastic Four #9. Again, probably file copies, because how many people were collecting Barbie and Ken in 1962? Barbie, a property through the toys mostly that is part of American consciousness. It'd be interesting to see what happens to this particular book as we near, I think the movie's coming out this summer. So that is just something that's kind of interesting. 28 copies on the census. This is a hard to find book. It is. I don't like to use the word scare or rare or scarce in describing books. But the 28 on the census is not a lot for a book that does have crossover appeal. Let's move to 1963. And a Hanna-Barbera animated property, much like the Flintstones, the Jetsons #1. Not as omnipresent as the Flintstones. There are 104 copies on the CGC census, median grade of 5.5. There's a 9.4 and a 9.2. So not as many high-grade copies. Let's look at another book from the same year, a key DC book, My Greatest Adventure #80, the first appearance of the Doom Patrol. Has 557 copies on the census, more than 5 times as many, so the Jetsons, there are, a decent amount of copies relative to both the Flintstones and the Barbie book. And the My Greatest Adventure does have 3 9.6s and 2 9.4s, so slightly higher grades than the Jetsons book. But the Jetsons did have a sale in February in a 4.5 of $190, but in January you had a sale for $370. And My Greatest Adventure in a 4.5 does have a fair market value of $625, so it is a more valuable book. Again, Jetsons is not as popular as some of the other properties. I'm going to talk about a property that I like, a book that I have from 1964, and I think has possibilities going forward to potentially be rebooted. It was rebooted, I think, in the 90s and the 2000s. That's Johnny Quest #1. Another Hanna-Barbera animated property. It was a one-shot. There are only 114 on the census. The median grade is a 6.0. I have an ungraded copy. I probably need to have some work done, and it has a slight spine roll that I have to work on. I haven't yet sent that in because I'm going to keep it in the personal collection. The last sale in Johnny Quest #1 was a 9.4, which sold in February for $2,640. Compare it to the non-key book, but a desired book, because it is a single-digit Avengers. That's Avengers #5. There are 1,146 copies on the census, 10 times as many as the Johnny Quest book, also with a median of 6. 9.4 last sold in 2018 for $3,600. So both books are quite expensive. The Johnny Quest book, I think, does have that possibility. I'm not saying go out there and speculate on Johnny Quest. Interesting note, Brad Bird, who directed The Incredibles, did have in Incredibles 2 some Johnny Quest Easter eggs in the background. So I don't know. That's a Disney property, so I don't know where the rights are. I don't know if Bird's interested in doing something, but just something interesting. Up next, we're going to 1966 key. And this is Knock Knock. And the Daleks. Doctor Who and the Daleks, which has issue number 190, although there weren't 189 issues of anything before that. It's kind of a one-shot. The first appearance of Doctor Who in comics, the original Doctor Who from the movie, the BBC property, 65 copies on the census in a Universal Blue label. This is a Gold Key book. This is a Dell book. They did have the Doctor Who IP. 65 with a median CGC grade of 6.0. The last sale of a 4.5, that's the last sale in any grade, was in January for $150. Compare it to a book of similar value, and that is Showcase number 60, the first Silver Age appearance of the Spectre. Census count of 716, again, more than 10 times as many of that Spectre book on the census. Median grade a little bit higher to 7, but the fair market value of 4.5 is 150. The same as the last sale of the Doctor Who book. Ask someone that you know if they know anything about Doctor Who. Maybe they will. Know anything about the Spectre? Probably not. Again, a lot of these books that we're going to talk about are much more in the pop culture public consciousness. Speaking of which, and this is a book that the general public and comic collectors know a lot about. 1967. We're going to talk about Star Trek #1 with this amazing photo cover, Gold Key book. There are 835 copies on the census. I think in part because this is a book recently that comic collectors have been going after. Star Trek has never left the public consciousness since it left the air. More popular than it was even, I think, when it was on the air. In movies and animated series. But interestingly, the comic books, these early issues have value, especially issue number 1. But some of the later incarnations that Marvel and DC did, and, other publishers, I think IDW and maybe now, total dollar bin fodder. Interestingly, because Star Trek does have a big, a huge fan base and a very, very loyal fan base. But they don't really go after just run-of-the-mill comics. But the #1 does have that crossover appeal, and it is a book that is sought after by comic collectors / investors. There are 835 on the census, which is a fairly robust number. The median grade is a 6.0. The fair market value for a 6.0 is $825. That's from Go Collect. Let's compare it to a DC key of the same year. Strange Adventures 205, the first appearance of Dead Man. Has a census count slightly higher of 1,096, about 20 or so percent, 25% higher. Median grade of 5.5, so still in that ballpark. The 6.0 has a fair market value of $575, about 2/3 the value of the Star Trek book. But when we talk about public consciousness, just ask your non-comic book friends, ask coworkers, ask relatives. Tell me what you know about Star Trek. They probably could tell you something. Right? The general public can tell you something about Star Trek. Tell you something about Dead Man. They will have no idea. Dead Man has really not crossed over into the public consciousness. There have been fits and starts of possible movies. I think a lot of people like Dead Man as a possibility to be used in live action, but we haven't seen him yet. But this isn't about Dead Man. This is about Star Trek, which is a much more well-known intellectual property. Has less of a census, but I don't think the value of the book is necessarily any more than supply and demand much more of supply and demand versus the Dead Man. We're going to keep Strange Adventures as our comp, looking at our next book, which is also sci-fi, but it's based on a Hanna-Barbera animated series. Again, a character that has remained in consciousness through the Cartoon Network's Adult Swim, and that is Space Ghost. Space Ghost #1 in 1967. The first appearance of Space Ghost has just 231 copies on the CGC census, a median of 6.5, a little bit higher than the other 267 books. And a 6.0 sold in January for $400. So it has a little less than half the fair market value of the Star Trek book. Space Ghost, evidently, Jason Segel has been writing a Space Ghost script. But that's all the news we have for Space Ghost. So, yeah, Space Ghost, again, not as well-known a property, but still more well-known than Dead Man, because Dead Man was never on Adult Swim. Never had his own animated talk show. Okay, let's look at 1970 and another hugely popular book, and that is Scooby Doo, Where Are You? #1 from 1970. This book was making hot lists all over the place. Scooby Doo has remained as part of the American pop culture scene since his animated series debut in 1969. Had several animated series after that, movies, and now a new animated series for adults on HBO Max. Everybody knows Scooby Doo. But there are only 347 copies on the census. And for a book from 1970, the very beginning of the Bronze Age, really, the median grade is only a 5.5. Remember, the Star Trek, 3 years older, has a median grade of 6.0. Let's compare it to a key DC book from that same year, Detective Comics 400, the first appearance of Man-Bat. Has a census count of 1,172, including 10 9.8s. Scooby Doo, only 2 9.4s. No books graded higher. And let's compare both gold key books. Let's look at Scooby Doo versus Star Trek. I am sure in the late 60s and into the early 70s, when this book was still new enough, there were people, adults, or at least teenagers, who collected Star Trek stuff and took care of that book. There were enough of those. Scooby Doo was completely for kids. There had been a very, very small percentage of readers who were adults that were into Scooby Doo, because it was a Saturday morning cartoon. It would take probably at least a decade before that property became something that people took care of. So the Scooby Doo is not found as in high a grade as contemporary books or even slightly older books that were geared towards more adult audiences. This is a book that Scooby Doo will be graded, be submitted in lower grades. Maybe not 0.5s and 1s, but maybe 4s, 3s. Scooby Doo #1 in a 5.5. You got me to 0.5 because a 5.5 sold in January for $1,125. Compare that to the Man-Bat. Remember, there are 3 times as many Man-Bats on the census, and they tend to grade higher. A 5.5 sold in February for $299. So less than a little bit more than a third of the price of the Scooby Doo. No, less than a third. I'm sorry, almost a quarter of the price of Scooby Doo. Supply and demand. There's more of a supply, but there's much more of a demand for Scooby Doo because, again, ask somebody that doesn't know about comics. Next person you see, tell me what you know about Scooby Doo. Tell me what you know about Man-Bat. A vast majority of the population will be able to. I've asked my wife about Scooby Doo. She can tell me something about Scooby Doo. I ask her about Man-Bat. She'll give me a look. She'll be like, huh? You expect me to know about that? It's sort of like when she talks to me about designers. Right? She's talking about some designer one time when we were dating, like Ferragamo. You know who Ferragamo is, right? I'm like, yeah, he quarterbacked the Rams in the Super Bowl. They lost to the Steelers, then went to the CFL, right? Vince Ferragamo. She was talking about a different Ferragamo. Right? Just different perspectives. Let's look at another book. This is from 1974, and this is a book that made the hot lists a few months ago because of its preeminence in popular culture right now, and that is The Addams Family #1 from 1974. This is the first appearance of The Addams Family in comic books. This also based on a Hanna-Barbera animated series. This was not based, and there were no comic books based on the 1960s TV series, the one starring John Astin, Carolyn Jones. That didn't have. Interestingly, The Munsters, which was a contemporary TV series of The Addams Family, did have comic books, but not The Addams Family. There was an animated show. Hanna-Barbera did a lot of animated shows based on 60s TV shows. Gilligan's Island, The Addams Family, The Brady Kids. Like the Gilligan's Island gang ended up on a planet in outer space. They did a Partridge Family. I think they did a... what was the other? They did a bunch of shows. So this is what that's based on. The current CGC census, 48. Only 48 copies on the CGC census, a median grade of 8.5. The last sale was in December, an 8.5 sold for $240. There are no 9.8s on the census, 3 9.6s. Let's compare it to, I wanted to compare it to a non-key book because not too many people were submitting the Addams Family for grading. Maybe if they thought it was an exceptionally high grade, I'm like, okay, it's first Addams Family, I'll submit that. Maybe I have a feeling we'll see more submissions. This would qualify as an economy level book. So if you're not fast tracking, it's going to take a while for that book to turn around. I wanted to compare it to another book, Incredible Hulk number 183. And I wanted to do 183 because, again, who's submitting 183 unless it's in high grade? So 48 Addams Families on the census, 110 Hulk 183s. The median for the Addams Family, 8.5. For the Hulk, 9.4. Because it's a run filler book, no significance, no Wolverine. You're only going to submit this in the highest of grades because anything really low, 9 or lower is probably, lower than 9 is probably case cost. There are, however, 7 9.8s of the Hulk 183 on the census as opposed to none of the Addams Family. Again, a book from a cartoon series that would be more geared towards kids. Although I could see in the mid-70s adults who were either had grown up on the live-action TV show buying the book maybe, as that a little bit of nostalgia for them, or were fans of the Charles Addams cartoons that appeared in the New Yorker. This was the first time the Addams Family was in a standard format comic book. Obviously, the whole intellectual property originated from those one-panel cartoons in the New Yorker. The last book we're going to talk about is a 1977 book, the only modern book on the list, and modern from CGC's standpoint, 75 or later. That is Winnie the Pooh number 1. Why Winnie the Pooh number 1? Because Winnie the Pooh has just entered the public domain. Winnie the Pooh was in a series of stories written by the British author A.A. Milne. It was the license was bought by Disney in the 60s. They did a number of short films, so people of my generation and probably younger generations as well, we really are familiar with Winnie the Pooh from there. Growing up, people of my age or older will remember Sunday nights, 7 o'clock on NBC, was The Wonderful World of Disney. And it was a hodgepodge of things. Sometimes they'd show nature documentaries. Sometimes they'd show original programming. Sometimes they'd show old animated films, including this. Sometimes they'd show part of a live action movie. But it was an incredibly popular show to watch on Sunday nights. And so those Winnie the Pooh animated films from the 60s really became ingrained in the public consciousness. But Winnie the Pooh has fallen into public domain. And so somebody made a horror film, Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey, I think is what it's entitled. Genre. I mean, I think that's for a very specific audience. Probably not the same audience that fondly remembers the animated films from Disney or the books by Milne. But at any rate, the census count for Winnie the Pooh number 1, this was an ongoing Gold Key series, 48. Just 48 universal copies on the census. First appearance of Winnie the Pooh in comic books. Median grade of 9.4, so people only been submitting this in high grade. The last 9.4 sale was in February for $365. So that is a reasonably healthy price. I wanted to compare it to another key. And I'm using a Marvel key in a book that was just about to be canceled. I think this is the penultimate issue. Marvel Spotlight 32, the first appearance of Jessica Drew's Spider-Woman. Census count, 4,903. More than 100 times as many on the census than the Winnie the Pooh book for a Marvel book that was just about to be canceled. Median grade, 9.0. Generally submitted in higher grade. Although you will see some mid-graders, and the mid-grade is, you probably get down into the 7 range, and it still has decent value. So, I think kind of the wrap-up here is that if you're a child of the 60s, even the 50s, the 50s, 60s, the 70s, the 80s, maybe even the 90s, there are properties out here of things that you grew up with. TV shows, movies, Saturday morning cartoons that aren't plentiful. They are certainly niche collections, But if you collect what you love, I'm not saying, oh, I think this is going to be optioned. This will make a Netflix series. This is coming to Disney Plus. I don't know any of that. But I do know that every once in a while something hits. If you really are interested in, I don't know. For me, I'm a fan of I Dream of Jeannie. And I always had in the back of my mind, I've never pursued it, of getting I don't know how many issues it ran, but there was an I Dream of Jeannie comic book in the 1960s. I Dream of Jeannie, there were 2 issues by Dell Comics in 1966 based on the TV show. Cover photos. It's always been something that it would be something that if I saw it at a show, I'd be like, oh, I'll grab that. But you do rarely see them because it's not something that people actively collect. But I just had in my Whatnot sale the other night a copy of the Monkees, the fictional band that had their own TV show. Somebody grabbed that book, right? And I know there are Gold Key fans, Gold Key collectors that watch my videos. So I hope you enjoy this video. Let me know in the comments below if you've collected any of these books, if you have any of these Dell Gold Key adaptations. The only one that I have is the Johnny Quest book. I found that at a flea market about 2 years ago, and I was so excited to get it. It's actually a nice copy. It's a good solid mid-grade. I'm thinking about a 6. So let me know if you have any of these, or if there's anything else that you collect, because there's a wide variety of stuff out there. And we all have our personal preferences, and it's just kind of like some fun stuff to collect. Obviously, TV shows and animated shows have had incarnations since then. From Marvel did, like, the Smurfs and Muppet Babies in the 1980s, Care Bears. Now Comics did a bunch of adaptations in the 80s and 90s. So just some fun stuff out there to collect if you see it. So, thanks for stopping by. You can take a look at a couple of my other videos here. Here, I'm going to put up top the link to my Johnny Quest video when I found that at the flea market. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.